I'd like to thank Periodic Paralysis Association for the invitation to speak. We're really glad to be here. And secondly, I'd like to thank Dr. Levitt for all his contributions to the field and also his support of Taro during our course of development of Kavaeus. So a little bit about myself. Mark Josek, a PhD, focused on neuropharmacology, neurophysiology, and have been in the industry for about 18 years. But prior to that time, I did a lot of, in academia, I did a lot of ion-gated channels works at my postdoc and for my graduate work. So I'm really glad to be here. So a little bit quickly about Taro. So Taro is an international-based research company that focuses on delivering high-quality pharmaceutical products to numerous therapies, but we also have a high focus on periodic paralysis at this time. These next two slides, these are slides that we're legally required due to pharma regulations to provide you with, and we'll cover some of this information later in the slide when we get into the bulk of the talk. But Kavaeus is a 50 milligram tablet that the FDA approved for the treatment of hyperkalemic and hypokalemic periodic paralysis and relevant variants. So in clinical studies, there are some side effects that were observed, one being a burning and a tingling sensation of the skin, sometimes difficulty thinking or concentrating, and sometimes a level of confusion. Along with that, there is a disturbance of taste in some individuals. And while we're excited to bring Kavaeus to the periodic paralysis population, there are some patients that will not be applicable for or have to use extreme caution. And those are patients that are on a high-dose regimen of aspirin, patients that are allergic to sulfa drugs, which Kavaeus is a member of, and also patients with certain liver, lung, and kidney complications. Additionally, if you're pregnant or planning to become pregnant, Kavaeus is not recommended. Just a few more statements. Kavaeus is not approved for a pediatric population or those patients that have issues with controlling their potassium and certain cardiac issues combined. Also, as you realize, Kavaeus adjusts the pH of the body, and some patients cannot tolerate that. Lastly, Kavaeus is also, in the clinical studies, thought to increase potentially falls, especially in the elderly population. So with the legal aspect taken care of, we'll get into the talk. So for our conversation today, there's three things that we want to focus on. First, I'll show a little bit of the clinical evidence that was submitted to the FDA for approval of Kavaeus. Then, with that, we'll next move into what we're doing over the next several years to advance understanding of periodic paralysis and also additional research that we're doing. And then finally, we'll talk about support programs for patients. So Kavaeus was, as you all know, the first FDA-approved treatment for periodic paralysis, and it's indicated for both hyperkalemic periodic paralysis, hypokalemic periodic paralysis, and related variants. Now, when we went to the FDA, we had two trials that we presented to them and were the basis of our case for approval. The primary trial was referred to as hip-hop, and no relation to the music. But that study was completed in 2014, and it was shown to decrease attack frequency. That was a statistical significance in hypokalemic patients, but we missed the significance in hyperkalemic. And that's primarily due to the sample size. We only had 21 hyperkalemic patients in the study. On the secondary trial, we were able to show that there was a decrease in attack frequency in both hyperkalemic and hypokalemic patients. And there was a high degree of statistical significance in both of those. So from these two trials, we were able to demonstrate the efficacy for Kavaeus. Next, we needed to look at safety, and we collected safety data, which is demonstrated here. And what we're looking at in this figure, or this table, is we're looking at the incidence of certain adverse events or side effects within both the Keveyis treatment groups and also the placebo groups. We were listing here anything that occurred with an incidence of greater than 5%. And on the package insert, the materials that come with the medication, we list the top. Those that are indicated or with an incidence of greater than 10%. And what we found were that the four most common that we see are all within the nervous system disorders. Paresthesia, which is the burning and tingling sensation. Cognitive disorders. Dysgeusia, which is a change in taste. And confusional state. So this is what we know to this point with Keveyis. We know it is efficacious. We know there's some side effects we need to be aware of, but we're ready to put this on the market and for patients to use this. Now, that doesn't mean we're done. We've got a lot more work to do, and what we're moving into next is how do we increase our understanding of not just Keveyis, but of the disease. And we've got a couple of programs that we're going to be moving into that will probably take us in through the next 2 years. The first is, much of the data on periodic paralysis is either very old, it is case studies, some of it is anecdotal, and what we want to try and do is pull together a panel of experts, both within the medical field and the patient community, and generate a consensus document. This is not in any sense of imagination of this is going to completely explain periodic paralysis, but we'll have one large body of evidence that can be generated. We hope to understand better the different periodic paralysis types, clinical presentations, so when you do first show up at the healthcare provider, what can be looked for or examined, diagnoses. We all understand that there is a very long lag between initial symptoms and diagnosis sometimes. And then management, whether that be behavioral changes, medications, or supplements. Our hope is that with this, with the experts both within the medical field and the patient community, we can have a very strong document that we can publish and push out to healthcare professionals so that physicians are more aware of periodic paralysis, and hopefully this will aid in diagnosis and treatment. Now the next step is on the clinical side, and what we'll be doing is we're going to start a clinical trial with patients on Keveyis, and this will be a registry study. So patients that start taking Keveyis, we're going to enroll 100 of those patients and follow them for a year. These patients will self-report experiences. This information will then, after the course of the year, will be provided to researchers. And again, this data will be published in manuscripts, presented at meetings, and again, to increase the awareness of the disease and hopefully improve on the understanding of the disease. A little bit of what we hope to learn from this, it's not just how Keveyis acts when treated in the general public, but also with the database of information on a large pool of patients, probably the largest that will be in the literature, we hope to be able to analyze demographics across patients and family history, disease history, prior and current treatments, what is working, what's not working. And then over the course of the year, we'll be examining attack frequency, be that the number of weekly attacks, severity, and also change in general muscle weakness. And then finally, for the Keveyis aspect, the dosing. Keveyis is approved in a 50 milligram tablet given twice daily. That's what's approved. That can go up to 200 milligrams a day. But we hope to understand more so, is it a general rule that works for maybe 70% of the patients and 10% use less, 20% use more? We hope to have a much better understanding of the dosing of Keveyis after that trial is completed. So finally, the last thing I'd like to touch on is the support services that Taro's put in place and the rapid access to Keveyis that we are ensuring. Taro developed a program called Keys to Care. And once you are prescribed Keveyis, there's 3 steps for you to receive it. The first one is to call Keys to Care, which is supported by Diplomat. Diplomat is out in the hall. What Diplomat serves as is they are the only pharmacy that provides Keveyis. This overcomes a lot of issues for us. Many general pharmacies wouldn't stock Keveyis because it's a small population. Diplomat will always have drug and be able to send drug out. Once you receive a prescription enrollment form, you'll fill this out with your healthcare provider and submit this to Diplomat. Your Keveyis will be sent out at no cost to you, while the Keys to Care representative works on doing multiple aspects. The first thing is they'll verify your insurance coverage. They'll navigate any additional insurance requirements that are needed, and then they'll explore copay assistance and support services. So with this program, quickly get drug for free, will help overcome some of the insurance hurdles, and you're always guaranteed that your pharmacy, which will be Diplomat, will be able to supply the drug. The other assistance programs that's being developed by Taro there's 2 aspects. One is the Taro Patient Assistance Program. And what this is this will provide Keveyis to any patient who meets certain income requirements. I know the first question is, what's the requirement? So a single person making less than $75,000 a year would qualify for this program. So very generous program to help, again, decrease the amount of out-of-cost or make that out-of-pocket or make that a zero cost for the patient. The second aspect is the primary periodic paralysis care line. And Taro has partnered with the Patient Advocate Foundation through supporting them. That's a nonprofit organization. And they are set up as a hotline that you can call anytime that you may have an obstacle in your health care, your insurance, any questions related to periodic paralysis. Any periodic paralysis patient can call. They don't need to be taking Keveyis. If they have a question, they'll be able to call. You'll be able to call them, and they should be able to help you. And we highly encourage for you to reach out to PAF and ask for assistance. So with these programs, Taro is very committed to all patients having access to the drug. And we are trying many avenues to reduce your out-of-pocket or have no out-of-pocket expenses for the medication. Now, with these programs, with the clinical trials and the consensus document, we've got a lot to do over the next couple of years, and we would like your help. There's multiple things that we can do together as a team over the next 2 years to make progress in understanding the disease and hopefully future treatments. So if appropriate, if you start Keveyis and you can participate in the patient registry, we would like your feedback, and as much feedback as you can provide, because the more data that we collect over the next 2 years, the more data for the physicians to analyze and for us to have a better understanding. Secondly, while there's been a lot of effort put into the Keys to Care program, and we think everything is streamlined and smooth, there will probably be hiccups. There always are in these programs. And if there are, or if there are any gaps, please again reach out to us as soon as possible so that we can rectify those and get things to moving smoothly for you. And then finally, we know we don't know everything. There's a lot to learn. Reach out to us with any questions, any suggestions, whether it be, have you thought about this for a new treatment, or as we just heard earlier, a new device that could possibly help in monitoring. Anything that comes to mind, we're open to those so that we can be farther along in 2 years than we are currently at this point. With that, I thank you for your time, and I'll answer any questions that may arise. Yes, sir.
I'm 76 years old. I'm 76 years old, and I have familia, so I have 3 generations right here. And I've got what I call permanent muscle weakness. It began with my toes. I couldn't stand on my toes. Then I couldn't walk up steps without using a banister. Then I got to where I couldn't raise up from the ground without getting a hold of something. And I was to the point that I had to stand in the shower and hold on with one hand and wash with one until I finally broke down and bought a seat. And I started on the Traveus just less than 3 weeks ago, and it's made a big difference. And I don't know how many people there are my age, but I think there's definitely something there for you to look at. I don't think I'll ever get good, but I definitely appreciate the good that I have right now.
That's great news. That is great. Well, I'd like to follow up on that point because honestly, you just made my day. So I was going to tell the story at the beginning, and I thought, well, let's wait. But so I've been in industry now for 18 years, and I can remember the best day of my career was late October 1998. How many of you have seen the commercials for Restasis, the dry eye drug? Okay, so that was the first product I worked on. And when I entered industry, I didn't know anything about dry eye. I was like, oh, dry eye, okay. Oh, it's a very significant issue. And as we went through the study, I was responsible for multiple sites, and I met some of the patients as I visited sites. At the end of the trial, we had a post-investigation or post-study meeting where we had physicians come out, and we also flew out some patients. One of the ladies that I was responsible for, or was in one of the clinics I was responsible for, comes up to me and she's like, Mark, can I give you a hug? And I was like, sure. And she said, you have changed my life. I haven't felt this good in 10 years. And at that moment I was like, this is what it's about. And you just saying that, I don't know if we've changed your life and you felt better than you have in 10 years, but just having that improvement, and hopefully we have that improvement across numerous patients, and it just allows to a trickle effect that we make huge progress over the next 10 years. So thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, if my child here is 5 that has it, is it something that's fine in children as well, or?
It is found in children as well. I'm not sure what the earliest age is. Or are you asking about Traveus? Traveus, so per the FDA, what I can speak to is we have not done pediatric studies. So there is no way we could promote that. But with your physician and with his understanding of your child's particular case and specific aspects, they can make that decision. Do you cut a tablet in half and use a lower dose? But your physician will have to decide that. That's something we can't speak to yet.
Great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, right here.
Oh, sorry.
I have a sort of tricky question for you.
Yes,
we
sir.
have many international visitors here who could make use of it. What are your thoughts about what might be able to be done for them coming up? What is your thinking or the plans that could be done eventually?
Yeah, there's a couple parts to that, or a couple parts answer to that question. The first thing is currently we do not have rights for outside of the U.S., but we are working and expect to have that soon. Secondly, we don't have approvals anywhere else in the U.S., but there are avenues and procedures that we can follow and that we're exploring where, let's say you were in the Netherlands and you wanted Traveus. We can possibly ship from Diplomat to the healthcare provider in the Netherlands, your particular provider, and they will be able to provide that. One thing we are doing is, while we're here, is we are collecting names, phone numbers, emails of anyone that is outside the U.S. that would like access. And as we work our way through that procedure, we'll keep everyone in the loop of what the next step is. So we are prepared for that. To go through approval process, it'll take many years, and we know a lot of patients don't want to wait that long. So the other avenue we're following up on is that provide us your name and email, phone number, contact information, and then as we get this other procedure in place, we will potentially be able to send drug out. Good question.
I have a couple of questions.
About I have a couple of questions about how Diamox and Cabezo's compare to each other. So the first question I have is that Diamox is a...
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Hold it up, perhaps.
Okay. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. So Diamox is a broad-range channelopathy drug, so it helps people with things besides just hypo and hyperkalemic. With Cabezo's, does it work anything like that?
So the mechanisms of action are similar. There may be differences so they're both sulfur drugs. They're both what we call topic or carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. And so from that aspect, they're both in the same class. Now with response to different effects on channels and broadness, I can't answer that at this time. As we learn more, maybe Dr. Levitt.
I'm gonna have to get a little close for comfort.
We're really close.
Yeah. So I think that empirically we know historically that dichlorphenamide has worked even in those folks where acetazolamide has stopped working. I mean, there's some folks that they use acetazolamide and it seems its efficacy wears off, and then you flip to dichlorphenamide. I know that Dr. Griggs feels that dichlorphenamide probably should be tried first line rather than acetazolamide because it's a more potent drug. Pound for pound, less dichlorphenamide works as good as more acetazolamide. That study would be very interesting to do a head-to-head, and that's what they didn't really. Did they do that in the hip hop? Really compare?
No, what I can tell you is in the hip hop trial, it was initially supposed to be 3 arms, and when patients learned that there's a chance of being randomized to acetazolamide, they just weren't interested in enrolling. So it ended up going from 3 arms to just 2 arms.
So placebo and dichlorphenamide.
Correct.
So yeah, because if you could, the way that evolved was if you could get acetazolamide on the market, why would you bother doing a clinical trial where you could get acetazolamide versus placebo? There's no incentive for you. But those folks for whom acetazolamide doesn't work, there would be a big incentive to go into that trial. But the bottom line is that there's no head-to-head of what's better and which one to choose.
Okay, well, you're leading into the second question that I have then. And that is Cabezo's a longer acting drug than Diamox?
Yeah, I don't know that. I think they're probably the same. I would have to venture to say. Again, there's no head-to-head study to say, what that means. But if you respond to the drug, then it should work. You're saying longer acting with respect to one dose or just over years?
Both. Whether you, in my case, I have to take a lot more of the drug, a lot more frequently now than I used to have.
So in your case, you have to take a lot more, which drug? Diamox, acetazolamide. So you have to take more dose and more frequently in order to have the same effect. That may or may not happen with dichlorphenamide. It remains to be seen. And I can't necessarily recommend for any one patient to try dichlorphenamide or not. It's a decision that obviously you have to make with your physician, and you have to decide how is your life going on one versus another, and is it worth it to switch and take the risk. Some people take a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor and they do worse, and so that's always a risk whenever you switch medicines. But if a medicine isn't working, obviously you have to think about alternatives.
ma'am.
I have a question. I believe this is previously known as Daronide, is that correct?
Correct.
Is there any change in this drug now than there was with Daronide? Is it different in any way?
So with the active moiety, there's no difference with the active component. Now, excipients in the tablet, there's probably different excipients, just from manufacturing practices from then to now.
Have you seen any correlation with this drug and depression? I took Daronide when it was Daronide, and then I did the hip-hop study. Now, I don't know if I was on the placebo or the actual drug. I believe it was the actual drug because I had the same severe depression that happened at the moment I started taking it. I didn't see that as a side effect. Is that something you've not found?
So if you go back and you look at all the adverse events, I believe the frequency of depression within the Keveyis arm was, I think, 3%. So it just wasn't listed on that table, but there were instances of that. Anybody else?
Is there any indication that this drug would be effective to be used on an as-needed basis, so to come out of an abortive attack or to be used after an attack?
Currently, I can speak to how it's approved for, and it's approved not as PRN. It's more of a chronic medication.
Does it build up in the system, or does it need to be replaced?
Well, so with carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, there's an aspect of you have an enzyme in your body called carbonic anhydrase. And there is a time period where the drug has to reach a point where it can saturate enough carbonic anhydrase to have an effect. So if you're asking if, I know that I have an attack coming and I'm going to take a pill, I don't think it could be used that way, but Dr. Levin's probably...
I would, in general, maybe there are some folks out there who, when they get an attack, they take a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor and it goes away, but it's meant to decrease the frequency and severity of attacks over time. If you have an attack, let's say of hypo, potassium is what's going to relieve that attack, immediatic. I think that Dr. Griggs was actually looking at bumetanide, or Bumex, which is a very potent diuretic, which may actually have benefit for an attack right at the second, which doesn't necessarily make sense, but I think it's acting different than just making you pee out potassium. But then over time, some people can have worsening paralysis afterwards, so they haven't sorted all that out yet.
Question. With some medications, there's a dependence effect over time that the body adapts to deal with the presence of the drug. From the studies that have been done so far, do you have good data for saying the degree to which that happens and whether you, when you're on this, you become dependent and it has less effect?
I'll answer that from two aspects. With the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are used for multiple indications. And I'm not aware of any aspect where there is a requirement for tapering of dose to your aspect of you've developed almost a requirement for the medication. And I don't believe that to be the case. We haven't seen that to be the case in the Keveyis trials either.
I don't have a question, but I want to give you one of the life-changing stories that you like.
Great.
An hour before I received the email from you or the FDA, I'm not sure which one that it came from, I was in ICU in a coma on a ventilator, and it didn't look good. And obviously I couldn't read the email, but I got home, read the email, and kind of thought, okay, I mean, I was pretty weak. Nothing was really exciting me at the time, but when I got the medication, I tried it, noticed a big difference. And most of everybody that's on Facebook and most of the board here knows my story. It's been a pretty tough time, especially with the breathing aspects and the spasms that EMS has a key to my house. That's how often they come. But you'll notice my wife isn't here because this is the first time in 2 years. She knew that I would be safe here, but things weren't this bad last conference, but she was still here every second of it. So things are not fixed, but you guys have changed my life already, and I love you.
Hey, that's great to hear.
My question is, what monitoring, what blood tests do you recommend the person should have? Because you mentioned it can affect the blood pH. Now, I do not wish to rain on anybody's parade. I was on Daranide for 8 months. I decided to discontinue it for various reasons, which I don't feel I should go into, because I don't want to take away hope from anybody. But it would be really interesting to know if a blood pH is supposed to be monitored. What do you suggest?
So, again, I'm a non-physician, but from the scientific aspect, and I can tell you the regulatory aspect, of which extensive regulations do the FDA, there are no requirements for measurement of pH or analysis of pH while on Keveyis. And that's really all I can speak. I can't give guidance on whether someone should or not.
It's always tricky when you prescribe a diuretic for a long-term use. I would say that certainly monitoring potassium, because it's potassium wasting, certainly monitoring creatinine to make sure your kidney's okay at baseline and isn't getting worse. If you monitor pH, you're going to see abnormalities because that's part of the therapeutic effect, most likely. But I think potassium and creatinine are reasonable. I think in the beginning, depends clinically on how you're doing. If you're doing well, you probably don't need to monitor as frequently. If you're not doing well, I think once a week is probably excessive. Once a month, maybe not enough. You kind of have to use judgment, but there's no real guidance out there. Certainly, as you get used to it, you can just kind of do it. But like when I have patients on Lasix, I like to measure once a month, once every 2 months, the potassium, see how their body responds. Different people waste potassium differently on a diuretic. And once you get a trend of how your body reacts, then you can kind of adjust or monitor as needed.
I just got a question. With acetazolamide, one of the side effects is kidney stones. Is that also a side effect with Keveyis?
It is potentially, but what I can tell you is from the clinical studies where we've documented thus far, we haven't seen that issue. But that's something that we hope to understand better as we go through this patient registry. These trials were relatively small trials compared to development of other drugs, just because of the indication. And so there are things that we'll learn, over the next 2 years that we just don't know now.
Yes, but you had the drug was first called Daranide. Was there already kidney stones in it? There's certain things from the past.
Well, there could be things. I can't speak to that directly. Whether that was a side effect, I don't know. I can research and look into that. But even if that were the case, we wouldn't be able to draw a comparison across because different formulations.
Well, I don't know. I would say that, if the active ingredient is the same, you're going to expect across the spectrum. And I would argue that any carbonic anhydrase inhibitor is going to predispose you to the same kind of kidney stone issue. And you ought to, think about staying hydrated. I know that, when I take a bunch of acetazolamide, I get stones, but when it really came out was I was in an internship. It was like 90 degrees in the hospital, and I hadn't eaten or drank for like 24 hours. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, pain. So if you don't take care of yourself, you're going to precipitate things a little more.
I think once again the age here speaks to it. My whole family, all three of us, was on the same medication at one time, known as Daronide. And we were on it for several years, and we didn't know anything about how the pH ought to be, acidosis, etc. And we just done what felt like was necessary, and the doctors went along with us. They didn't do just what we said, but we had a rapport back and forth. And so there's probably others here that was on it, and I don't know, my daughter may have a better idea, but we were on it for several years, never had a immense problem. So that's my comment.
It's good to hear.
It's good to know. Symptoms. Side effects.
Okay, so one last question. If just from a business side of things, if we were to purchase this out of pocket, how much does it cost?
So that's a tricky question. I can tell you some baseline information. So what I can tell you is the pills, the current price is set at $135 a pill. Now, that is the suggested price. Now, once we go to different insurance providers, depending upon who that is, there are always we have discounts and clawbacks and reimbursement programs first to the insurance company, and so that price would never be reasoned by or reached by us. So that's what the current price is.
$100,000 a year.
Yeah, if the full price is paid, it's $100,000 a year. That is to the insurance company. But let me just remind you of a couple of quick things. One is our number one goal is that anyone that needs Keveyis has access to it, and that's why we have the keys to care. That's why Diplomat is here, and then we also have the patient assistance program. Whereas if you make less than $75,000 a year, then you qualify for that. So our goal is that you're able to get Keveyis without any out-of-pocket expense or very little, and that's one of our top priorities.
So okay, now for those folks who are not at this conference, and I walk into I go to Minnesota and I have periodic paralysis. I go to my primary care and he says, "Oh, I'll write you dichlorphenamide. Here, take this to your pharmacy." So what happens?
Well, they wouldn't get it because it's only through Diplomat. So any prescribing physician will know that Diplomat needs to be contacted.
How would they know?
Well, because number one, we'll have an educational campaign for physicians. Now, will we reach everyone? We won't be able to. But if you write the script and you take it to the pharmacy, we don't carry that. Then there's either be reaching out to you or reaching out to the manufacturer, and then we can guide them on Diplomat is the pharmacy. We've got these 3 steps. If you call, fill out the form, we'll send you the drug for free.
Is this all on a website that someone can search? If they search dichlorphenamide, are they going to come to Keveyis Diplomat? It starts from a totally logistical standpoint.
Yeah, no, it's very complex. It's a good question, and I'm not sure about the web-based aspect at this point. That is something that the program people internally can give us feedback, and I'll provide that information that is out there. But right now we've got the phone number to call, the web-based thing may be in the works. I just don't know. But that is something that we could look into.
Let me ask you one other question, it's on the same topic. How much of this is how many trusts do you have in NHS in the UK? Do you have this drug in the trust?
No, we
And I'm
do.
asking for the participants who would chat here.
Yeah, could you repeat this? Oh, yes. So your question is, how many trusts in the UK
Have this drug.
have this drug? And I believe the answer is 0. Because,
So if it's not in the trust, I can't prescribe you. That's kind of how it works.
correct, there would be an aspect of, and again, it's a
I know that's a UK question, you're a US person. But
well, it's a good question, and it's just a complicated procedure that we are working through, and we're trying to address. And I'm not sure. I know in the past when I've dealt with the UK, things sometimes a little more complicated there. They're friends, but as we look through and look across the globe, what we hope is that, let's say you are a patient in the UK. I would like to have Keveyis. You and your doctor talk about Keveyis. We are reached out to, and then we're able to send medication to your physician for him to provide to you. That's in the ideal world. Will we be able to do that tomorrow? We won't be able to do that tomorrow, but we are working on that.
Great. Thank you so much.